The Hegelian Dialectic. Carrying on with Section 2, Chapter 4. The Hegelian Dialectic is a philosophical understanding that is often manipulated by those in office, or those overseeing those in office. There is, in my opinion, nothing wrong philosophically with the Hegelian Dialectic in and of itself. It points towards a truth that we even now are just, getting better understandings of. The dialectical process in simplistic terms is as follows: thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So novelty comes about by creation of a thesis. So, the amber mind in the spiral dynamics worldview might say, so this is a key! You can't explain anything, it's just a key, nothing else. Thesis is the key. The antithesis may say something like, modernity-based physics tells us that this key is actually made up of some small subatomic particles, and therefore the key isn't really a key, it's just a complex arrangement of subatomic particles. So the antithesis, in other words, or at least so described, is contradicting the thesis. The synthesis integrates the two and says maybe something like, so given our linguistic context, the usage of key is reasonable and helpful, so we should use key. But on another level, perhaps even a deeper level, it's just a complex arrangement of subatomic particles. So you get two, they're both true. So, the same system can be applied to wars, and applied in a way to help direct the outcomes, or desired outcomes, to a significant extent. Suppose the world banking establishment and maybe power elite want to deindustrialize America. So this may not be accurate, but let's assume it is for the moment. So the thesis may be that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. So given the fact the majority of Americans take it, or at least took it, for granted that 9/11 was caused by some Middle Eastern fundamentalists, there would therefore be good reason to put an end to those people wielding weapons of mass destruction, or nukes. Therefore, invading them is reasonable, at least to some measure, for the majority of people, to put a stop to the creation of such devices and avoiding an event far worse than 9/11. And who else will do this but one's own military complex, especially because it's the biggest military complex on the planet? So off to the war drums we march, and we are now engaged in a very costly war, not only financially, morally, but spiritually, and many die and suffer due to this consequence of the war machine. Then we learn, oh no, there are no nukes. This is convenient on a number of levels if, again, they're trying to deindustrialize America. Firstly, it was used as a primary reason to invade, and secondarily, we now have seen globally by many people we're seen, or the Americans are seen as being morally unjust, or engaging in morally unjust wars. So this degrades the image of America and also costs America trillions, which is a double whammy if they intend to deindustrialize. So the war is carried out on, and it further integrates the two in a sense. There's the skyrocketing costs and the degradation of the global image because they're carrying on in a war that they've already found out to be not morally sound. And so, I mean, this is from one level. Another level, anyway. So the two have been synthesized if this was in fact planned. But was it planned? That's a question I'll let you ponder throughout this chapter, this video. We have a thesis. So purposefully get us into war based on a lie. An antithesis: prove that the reason we went to war was in fact based on a lie, and that we constructed that lie. And the synthesis: remain vague on the reasons for staying, but stay as long as possible in the war to further deteriorate the American image and cost, and create the costs of ever-climbing war, and allow the costs of war to climb, so while maintaining silence on the deep fact that it was all set up and based on a lie. The economics of war. So remember, controlling the creation of currency means power for those that yield the wealth. And if they're wielding it from a morally childish position, one can expect bad things to follow. So if there is indeed a global elite, and they have been operating in the sidelines for many years, that it's reasonable to think that they have all the money they would ever need to essentially provide what I've spoken of earlier. So they're maintaining this currency domination for the purposes of furthering the power. And then delving into this, what are the deep ongoing connections between the issuance of money and the overwhelming number of wars the world has been involved in as of late? So here's an often quoted statement by the Rothschild family, or by Rothschild. I forget which one it is, which Rothschild. So he says, quote, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws," end quote. And when you connect that with Rothschild's quote in 42 in Paris, it's kind of interesting. So he says, I quote, "You have seen the man who is the head of the finances of Europe." So I infer from this, by calling himself the head of finances of Europe, he's suggesting quite explicitly that he controlled the money supply in Europe, and given what he said in the sentence quoted before, he would therefore be manipulating the laws, as he had the money to do it. And the understanding as to how, and then, given some other things that I'll talk about later, the willingness. And there's also beyond that solid historical grounds pointing in that direction. So I quote, "The Rothschilds operated a highly efficient intelligence gathering system which provided them with advanced knowledge of important events, knowledge which was invaluable for investment decisions. For example, when an exhausted Rothschild courier delivered the first news of the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan Rothschild was able to deceive the London bond traders into selling Penny, and that allowed him to acquire the dominant holdings of England's entire debt at but a fraction of its worth." So that's the end of the quote. So in other words, he knowingly, the whole story, I won't get into it too much, is that he knew that the war that Napoleon was a part of wasn't going to win, but he came back to London, or had somebody come back and say that it was going to win. That they've won, actually. They've already won. Therefore, the bond markets cleared out due to the fear, and then Nathan bought up all the stocks and bonds and so forth. Then they found out that in fact Napoleon didn't win, and then he had a giant monopoly because he owned all these different stocks and bonds that people, got out of because they thought that the war had ended. Roughly. I read it a couple of months ago, so that's not exactly, but close enough. I will instead give a 4-quadrant breakdown on the house of the Rothschilds. So in the upper left, imagine a man that is stunningly intelligent, cunning, but has contempt for the average man, that is hidden, but only subtly hidden. The Rothschild family has historically been highly cognitively aware but morally undeveloped. The lower left, this is made clear by the kinds of deceptions that have flooded from the family, as well as the time and again wealth creation through war, and the paying off of media to give them a good public image. In the upper right, their actions and behavior have been highly problematic and profit-driven / power-driven. In other words, understanding the behaviors of others has been used by the family to amass industry and systems of control. In the lower right, he observed that kings and politicians are always fighting over something or other, and has concluded that wars are inevitable consequences of our present-day social systems. The Rothschilds have historically not been subject to feelings of patriotism, and seems to have actually repressed this notion, not in a healthy trends that include but exclude. So they have been able to freely observe how they can set up institutions so that these social wars can be manipulated and be used to financially create financial gain, not only by lending or creating money to finance the wars, but from government favoritism and the granting of commercial subsidies or monopolies. I will therefore outline some of the conclusions such a man might draw. Somewhat speculative, but yeah, take it as you take it. So number one is War is the ultimate discipline to any government. If you can successfully meet the challenges of war, it will survive. If it cannot, it will perish. All else is secondary. The sanctity of its laws, the propensity of its citizens, and the solvency of its treasury will be quickly sacrificed by any government in its primal act of survival. Actually, these are quotes by G. Edward Griffin. And the next, number 2, all that is necessary, therefore, to ensure that a government will maintain or expand its debt is to involve it in war or the threat of war. The greater the threat and the more destructive the war, the greater the need for debt. Number 3, to involve a country in war or the threat of war, it might be necessary for it to have enemies with credible military might. If such enemies exist, all the better. If they exist but lack military strength, it will be necessary to provide them with money to build their war machine. If an enemy does not exist at all, then it will be necessary to create one by financing the rise of a hostile regime. Number 4, the ultimate obstacle is a government which declines to finance its wars through debt. Although this seldom happens, when it does, it will be necessary to encourage internal opposition, insurrection, or revolution to replace that government with one that is more compliant to our will. The assassination of heads of states could play an important role in this process. John Perkins talks about this with the Jekylls in Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Number 5, no notion can be allowed to remain militarily stronger than its adversaries, for that could lead to peace and a reduction of debt. To accomplish this balance of power, it may be necessary to finance both sides of the conflict, and therefore must be destroyed. So neither side should be allowed a decisive victory or defeat. While we must always proclaim the virtues of peace, the outspoken objective is perpetual war, which I believe is the case with the Middle East presently. Sorry, guys. Blessings.